Elias Boone was checking the horse stall when he heard a rustling noise. His hand tightened around his Winchester as he moved quietly. Inside, two figures tall and broad-shouldered, with bronze-toned skin streaked with dust and thick black hair draping over their shoulders, were hunched over a bag of cornmeal. Two Apache sisters, Naya and Tala, each as strong and solid as living statues of bronze, their muscles tense beneath sun-browned skin and a map of scars. Elias raised his rifle. The light hit their dark eyes, not afraid, only weary and hungry. The older sister, Naya, turned slightly to shield her sibling and spoke with a hoarse voice. "Please, just let us go." In that instant, Elias saw more clearly the wounds on their arms, red rope marks still etched into their skin, dried blood crusted around their wrists. He slowly lowered his rifle. "If you need anything, take it, and then leave." The two looked at each other, then gathered a bit of cornmeal and a few potatoes. No one said thank you, but as they walked away, the younger one, Tala, turned and looked back at him for a long moment, a look caught between gratitude and wariness, as if trying to memorize the face of the man who did not shoot. Elias stood still in the stall, his rifle lowered, heart pounding in the scorched silence. The desert wind blew across the porch roof, carrying fine streaks of dust that floated like smoke. Elias Boone stood on the porch, a cup of cold coffee in hand, staring out at the sun-scorched hills. Since the day those two women left, he had not slept through a single night. Sometimes, in the wind, he would hear distant hoofbeats or the faintest sound of laughter, vague, like a memory. Then one morning, in front of his house appeared two dried fish and a bundle of tobacco leaves, neatly tied with a strip of leather. No words. No tracks. Just a faint scent of smoke. Elias understood the Apache had just said thank you, in their own way. He smiled, placed a fresh bag of cornmeal beside the gift, and quietly walked away. From that moment, an invisible connection began to form. They did not see each other, but they knew the other was there. From time to time, Elias would find barefoot tracks near the well, or a strand of black hair caught on the fence. Once, when he returned from a distant field, someone had swept the horse stall clean and stacked the firewood neatly. He did not need to ask. There were few people in the desert, and gratitude was more often shown through actions than words. One evening, as he was patching the barn roof, the two figures appeared again at the edge of the hills. Naya came first, her broad shoulders catching the red sunlight. Tala followed, tall but softer in her steps, her hair loose in the wind. They approached slowly, without hesitation. Elias set down his hammer and gave a slight nod, a greeting between three people who shared no common language but understood each other through their eyes. That night, they lit a fire in the yard. Elias brought out some salted meat, and Tala offered a bundle of spices. No one spoke much, only the crackle of the wood and the firelight dancing on bronze skins slick with sweat. Naya looked over and spoke, her voice low and steady. "Aren't you afraid of us?" Elias shook his head. "I am more afraid of being alone." The words made Naya smile slightly. A short smile, but enough for him to realize. These two women were not just ghosts of the desert. They, too, were searching for a place to breathe. As night fell, they left without a word. But before vanishing behind the cactus ridge, Tala turned to look back once more, a gaze long and deep, like a breeze that carries something left unsaid. From that day on, the ranch was no longer completely lonely. Elias began rising earlier, smiling more often, and every evening, when the wind shifted, he would look toward the hills where two tall silhouettes would sometimes appear again, quietly watching him like spirits learning to trust in the kindness of humankind. The sun rose like fire, scorching the golden, burnt land. Elias Boone worked shirtless on the fence, sweat soaking through his coarse trousers. Suddenly, the sound of hooves echoed across the ground. He looked up. Naya and Tala appeared, riding two wild ash-colored horses, red dust swirling behind them in a thick cloud. They were no longer shadows on the edge of the hills. They rode straight into the yard, their eyes calm and proud. Naya dismounted, her broad shoulders glinting in the sun, muscles lean and taut like steel. Tala gave a faint smile, picked up a water bucket to help Elias, saying nothing. The three of them worked side by side, in silence, with only the sounds of hammers and their warm breath filling the air. Every now and then, Elias caught their eyes dark, deep, unreadable. He could not name what he felt, reverence, or perhaps a slow-burning flame in his chest. By midday, when the sun bleached the world white, Naya set down her hammer. Her black hair fell across her shoulders. Her voice was low, husky. "How long have you lived alone?" Elias wiped his brow. "Since my father died," Tala chimed in, half teasing. "No woman?" Elias gave a sheepish smile. "No." The sisters exchanged a glance. Then Naya stepped closer, her eyes burning. "I have been craving a man," she said, slowly, clearly. "It has been a long time since I touched anyone. What about you?" The question hit him like a blow to the chest. Elias froze. His heart pounded. He swallowed hard. "Never have." Tala burst into laughter, a rough, raspy sound rising into the breeze. A man untouched by the world. Naya took one more step. The scent of sun-browned skin, sweat, and smoke swirled around them. "Then today, you have lived." She touched him. The kiss came suddenly wild, full of earth and fire. Elias kissed her back, without thinking. Everything he had buried under years of loneliness ignited at once. They pulled each other down into the cellar. The only light came through a narrow crack in the boards. Naya pressed him against the wall, while Tala stood in the doorway, her breath quick, eyes fixed on them. In the thick darkness, three bodies tangled not out of lust, but out of hunger to be touched, to feel real. When their breathing finally calmed, Elias trembled as he sat against the wall. Naya looked up at him, her eyes briefly soft. "You are not like the others," she whispered. "How so?" "You are not afraid to love someone you are supposed to fear." Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying sand and the scent of distant smoke, a sign that someone was coming. Inside the small cellar, Elias stared through the thin line of light and knew that the fragile piece he had just touched was about to be swept away by a real storm. The desert night was thick as ink. The moon, broken in half, cast a pale light over the ranch, which now held only silence and the breath of hot wind. Elias Boone had just dozed off when the sound of hooves echoed from afar, first scattered, then pounding like thunder. He jumped to his feet, grabbed his Winchester, and looked out the window. From the base of the hill, 20 Apache warriors were approaching, a long line of torches blazing through the night. Firelight danced across faces painted red, eagle feathers swaying in the wind. The whole sky seemed to tilt under their eerie chants. Naya was already on the porch, her hand gripping a long knife, bare shoulders gleaming with sweat. Tala stepped beside her, her eyes cold and terrifyingly calm. "They're coming for us," Naya said quietly. Elias nodded slightly. "And me? You're just the excuse they need to kill." The first torch was thrust into the ground at the edge of the yard, flames leaping taller than a man. The leader, a man built like a stone pillar, his face painted with a red skull, shouted out, "Naya, Tala, come back. Come back now, or we will burn this place to the ground." No one answered. Only the wind and the fire hissed through the old boards. Elias stepped off the porch, rifle in hand, eyes shining in the firelight. He did not tremble. He stood in the open ground, back turned toward the two women, as if he himself were the final wall. "She chose to stay," he said, voice low but clear. "And I choose to die with them if I must." Murmurs rose among the warriors, then fell into silence. The leader bared his teeth in a grin. "A little man dares to challenge the blood of our tribe." Elias replied calmly, "No. I challenge the ones who have forgotten what freedom means." That made Naya look at him for a long moment. She stepped forward, shoulder brushing his, and her voice rang out like a drumbeat. "We do not belong to anyone anymore. We choose freedom, and this man." For a moment, the night itself seemed to pause. The warriors looked at one another, torn between law and honor. Some bowed their heads, others clenched their jaws. Then the leader lowered his torch and gave a subtle nod. "Then live, and pay the price of freedom." They turned their horses and rode away. 20 torches slowly disappeared into the distance, like a line of spirits fading into the dark. Elias, Naya, and Tala stood in silence among the ashes, as the wind carried sparks around them. Tala spoke softly, her voice trembling but firm. "We are still alive." Naya looked at Elias. Her hand found his and squeezed tight. "No. Starting tonight, we begin to live." Above them, the moon sank into gray clouds, and in the middle of the scorched land, 3 people stood side by side, small, exposed, but solid as stone before the storm to come. "I am deeply grateful for your presence here. If this story stirred something in you, memories of dusty afternoons, of hoofbeats echoing through your chest, then please subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit down together, and I will tell you another tale from the Wild West." The next morning dawned slowly, murky like ash. Smoke still lingered in the wind, drifting across the scorched land. Elias Boone stood on the porch, his hands scratched and raw, eyes fixed on the streaks of soot scattered across the field. Behind him, Naya was wrapping the wound on her shoulder, while Tala tended a small fire, cooking something the scent of dried meat and smoke mixing with the faint trace of old blood. No one spoke, only the wind howled through the broken fence. They had survived the night, but Elias knew that did not mean they were safe. Naya looked up, her voice rough and low after the long night. "They will come back. Maybe this morning. Maybe next month." Elias replied quietly. "I know." Tala added more wood, and the fire flared. "Then why do you not run?" He turned to her, his eyes the color of cooled ash. "I do not want to leave this place. If I go, the ranch dies. But if I stay, it is home. Even if only for a day." The words made Naya pause. In the pale morning light, his sun-worn face seemed carved with a strange kind of resolve. She stepped closer, her hand still trembling, but her voice firm. "Last night, you stood between us and death. No one has ever done that. Not Apache men, not white men." Elias answered softly. "Maybe they never met someone worth doing it for." Naya lowered her head. A tired smile flickered across her lips. Then she said slowly and clearly, "We no longer belong to anyone. Not to a tribe, not to laws. All we have left is each other. And freedom." Tala looked at her sister, eyes filled with both fear and pride. She gave a quiet nod. "Then we choose freedom." They stood together in the morning light, 3 strangers bound by a shared path, a road with no return. That night, as the cold set in, Naya and Tala lay beside Elias in the old cellar. There was no hesitation like before, only the warmth of people who had found shelter after the storm. They did not speak of love, only survival, but in every touch, every breath, life was rekindled. Outside, the wind slipped through the wooden door, sweeping up the ashes of torches long burned out. Elias opened his eyes, staring at the dark ceiling, feeling the warmth of skin beside him. He knew he had lost everything that once meant safety and in return, gained something more precious, a reason to exist. When Naya shifted slightly, her black hair falling across his chest, she spoke in a near whisper. "Last night we died." Elias looked at her and replied gently, "And this morning we were born again." Outside, the wind blew across the gray, burnt fields. But amid the ashes, Elias Boone's ranch had begun to come alive again from the hearts that had just found their freedom. 3 weeks passed, the desert began to change color. Where torches had once scorched the earth, now thin strips of young grass grew, soft as silk. Elias Boone's ranch was no longer silent. The sound of hammers, neighing horses, and warm voices echoed through the air each day. Naya rebuilt the wooden fence, her broad shoulders lined with veins, each hammer strike like a drumbeat. Tala braided rope, retraining the wild horses. She laughed more now, a rare smile from someone who had lived by blood and fire. Elias watched them, not just with admiration, but with something deeper, a kind of peace he had never dared to believe was real. In the mornings, they ate together on the porch, dried meat, bitter coffee, and an air quiet yet full of warmth. "You know," Tala said, squinting under the sun, "when you work, you look more Apache than white." Elias gave a soft chuckle. "Maybe because I no longer know where I belong." Naya set down her tin cup and looked at him. "You belong where you choose to stay." With each passing day, the ranch came back to life along with their hearts. Elias learned to ride the Apache way, and the 2 sisters learned how to laugh, to trust, and to garden. They planted corn, dug a new well, and sometimes sang songs in a language he did not know. But the melodies stirred the air as if old spirits were listening. One afternoon, a rare rainstorm rolled in. The three of them ran out into it, letting the water pour over their hair and shoulders. Naya laughed loudly, droplets clinging to her bronze skin like melting gold. Elias stood watching, and for the first time in years, he felt something bloom in his chest like the first green shoot in dry soil. That evening, they sat by the fire, its red glow casting warm lines across their sun-darkened faces. Elias asked softly, "What if the tribe comes back?" Tala replied, "Then they will see that we lived." Naya added, "And they will know freedom cannot be burned." Their eyes met through the flicker of flames. No words were needed. Each of them understood. Time had turned 3 exiles into a family. Later that night, Elias stepped outside and looked toward the misty hills. The wind carried the scent of fresh earth and young corn. He turned. Naya stood in the doorway, her shadow silhouetted in the moonlight. She spoke gently. "I used to think strength only came from a clenched fist," he answered. "And now?" Naya smiled and stepped forward, placing her hand on his chest. "Now I know. It comes from here." The wind swept past them, carrying a soft laugh like the breath of the desert after rain. That night, inside the small house, they lay beside each other, not out of desire, but from the quiet joy of people who had finally found a place to belong. Autumn came to the desert, a season where the wind no longer burned, but still carried the scent of dry earth and old smoke. Elias Boone realized he had stopped counting the days. His ranch now echoed with the crowing of roosters, the sound of horses, and the soft laughter of 2 Apache women every morning. But peace in these lands was always as fragile as a thread. One morning, Tala returned after gathering herbs from the woods. Her face was tense, eyes dark. "Someone followed me," she said, her voice hoarse. Elias glanced at Naya. The older sister understood instantly. No one asked questions. They simply checked their rifles, dimmed the fire at the hearth, and waited. By late afternoon, dust rose from the west. The 3 stood on the porch, watching as a group of riders slowly emerged in the sunset glow. Not white men, Apache. 20 riders had once come, but now only 6 remained. 6 was enough to kill, enough to carry bad news. The one leading had a long scar across his cheek. He stopped his horse at the gate and looked straight at Naya. "The chieftain has forgiven you, but his son has not," he said in rough English. "He swore he would take the heads of all 3 of you." The air grew heavy. Elias tightened his grip on the Winchester. "What about you?" he asked. The man raised his head, eyes weary. "We only bring words, not knives." Then he turned his horse and rode off, leaving behind a trail of dust and a parting warning. "They will come when the red moon rises." As their shadows faded, Tala shivered. "He will not stop." Naya stepped onto the porch, her gaze oddly calm. "I know, but I will not run either." That night, the wind shifted. Elias checked every rifle, every bullet, laid knives on the table, ready. Naya sat across from him, firelight revealing the scars on her shoulder, each one a life survived. "Do you regret it?" she asked. "Regret what?" "Letting us stay." Elias looked at her, his voice steady. "No, because since you walked into my life, I finally know I have a heart to lose." Naya was silent for a moment, then said softly, "If they come, do not die, stupid. Live. For this place." He nodded. "I only know one thing. No one will take the woman I love." Outside, the moon began to rise over the ridge, dim, but glowing with an eerie red tint. Tala whispered, "Blood moon." The 3 of them looked at each other unafraid, because sometimes it is only when facing death that we realize true freedom does not lie in running away, but in standing still and loving what we choose to protect. That night, the ranch sank into silence, with only the wind slipping through the wooden roof like the breath of fate drawing near. Dawn rose slowly, as if afraid to break the fragile silence left by the night before. Elias Boone sat on the porch, rifle still in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. The blood moon had set, and no one had come. Only the wind remained, and the faint scent of grass scorched from the night before. Naya stepped outside, a weathered blanket draped over her shoulders, her sun-kissed skin glowing in the early light. Tala followed, carrying 3 cups of black coffee. No one said a word. They simply watched the sun rise over the hills, its golden rays piercing through the dust, making the world shimmer as if melting into light. After a night of waiting, they understood. Sometimes, the enemy never comes because the fear in your heart has already died. And so began 3 months of harvest. The ranch came fully back to life. Elias built another horse stall. Tala broke in a new herd of wild horses. Naya planted barley over the burned land. By midday, the sound of hammers, laughter, and Apache songs floated in the wind. There were no more lines between host and guest, between white and brown only people, rebuilding their lives from ash. That evening, Elias stood watching the sisters by the fence. Sunset painted their bronze skin in brilliant gold, like 2 living statues shaped by wind and fire. Naya wiped the sweat from her brow and turned to him. "Do you see?" she said. "This land knows how to forgive." Elias stepped forward, placed his hand on hers. "No. It is people who teach the land to forgive." She smiled softly, her dark eyes glinting like still water. "We saved each other, Elias." He nodded, his voice low and warm. "No. You saved me first. I just learned how to live again." Tala stood nearby, quiet, a faintly wistful smile on her face. "That's enough," she said. "In this world, what more could anyone really ask for?" As the sun touched the hills, they sat on the porch, the last light of day bathing their faces. Elias poured whiskey into 3 tin cups and raised his glass. "To freedom," Naya added, "to those brave enough to pay the price to live." Tala smiled. "And to tomorrow, even a short one is worth it." The wind rose, cooling the land once scorched by fire. Barley swayed gently like waves. 3 souls, a lonely rancher, 2 outcast warriors sat together in a quiet warmth, where no one owed anyone anything, and only freedom remained. There are battles not fought for land, but to keep the human part of the heart alive. Out here, on this red-dusted land where the laws of survival are often crueler than bullets, kindness still blooms like wildflowers growing between rocks. Elias did not pull the trigger when he could have, and in that moment, a different world was born, one where freedom is not something granted, but something discovered through the courage to care, to choose love over fear. Because sometimes, even the smallest act of kindness can be enough to free 3 imprisoned souls from war, from prejudice, and from the darkness inside themselves. Above all, I wish you health and happiness, wherever in the world you may be. I love you, my dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Tell me, what did this story make you feel? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Type the number 8 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales from the Wild West. Right next to the well, an old local man lay motionless, his body covered in red dust. A trail of dried blood stretched from his waist down to the ground. His thin arm was reaching out, as if he had tried to crawl there for a drink of water. Elias tightened his grip on the bucket handle, his eyes scanning the yard. Silent, not a soul in sight. Only the sound of wind whistling through the broken fence. He stepped forward and knelt down. The old man's skin was burning hot, his breath shallow and irregular. His cloudy eyes cracked open, letting out a raspy whisper. Elias asked no questions. He unstrapped the canteen from his belt and slowly poured water onto the old man's lips. He stood up and dragged the man into the shade under the eaves. Pulling out an old dagger, he sliced open the shirt around the wound. Elias washed it clean with well water and wrapped it temporarily using torn strips from an old shirt. Once he was done, he leaned against a wooden pillar and lit a cigarette. Smoke curled upward, mixing with the old man's labored breathing. Elias knew this would bring trouble to the farm, but looking at the man lying still by the well, he just could not let him die like some abandoned animal. The late afternoon sunlight was beginning to soften. A breeze swept through, carrying the scent of dry earth, and Elias could feel it clearly. The long-standing silence of the farm had just been broken. 2 days later, just as the sun was rising, Elias stepped out into the yard and realized the old man was gone. No sound of footsteps, no trace left behind except for a trail of dry soil stretching out toward the fields. He had left as quietly as he came. Elias leaned against the porch pillar and spat out the cigarette butt. All right then, he muttered. At least he's alive. He turned toward the barn to check on the cattle, ready for another ordinary day. But by midday, the sound of hooves echoed from afar. Elias frowned, grabbed his Winchester rifle, and walked toward the gate. Through the haze of red dust, 6 figures emerged. 6 Apache women on horseback. They stopped just outside the fence, each one tall and strong, muscles taut beneath sun-darkened skin. The one in front, Sila, dismounted. She stood tall, her deep black eyes fixed on Elias. "You saved Elder Nahuel," she said, her voice low and commanding. "We are here to serve and repay our debt." Before Elias could respond, they all got off their horses. Nara led the horses to the well and began drawing water. Luma rolled up her sleeves and started gathering the dry hay. Taya pulled the chain to close the gate. Wika and Anya headed straight to the fence line, inspecting each wooden post. Elias stood frozen, the rifle still in his hand. "Hold on," he barked, but they ignored him. By noon, a pot of steaming stew was sitting in the middle of the yard. Elias watched as the 6 women sat around the fire, eating and chatting in Apache, as if this was their home. He tapped the barrel of his rifle against the wooden post. "I did not invite anyone here." Sila looked up, her gaze sharp as a blade. "And you are not sending us away. You saved the soul of the tribe. Now the tribe gives back. Through our service." Elias clenched his jaw. A part of him wanted to send them all packing, but as he looked around, the fence now straighter, the horse stable clean, and the yard quieter than it had ever been, he just grunted and turned away. That night, the 6 women lit a campfire out in the yard. Their husky voices sang into the night, mingling with the sound of insects. Elias sat on the porch, his back resting against the wooden pillar, the tip of his cigarette glowing red. For the first time in many years, the ranch was no longer completely silent. The next morning, Elias woke up to the sound of loud hammering out in the yard. He opened the door and saw Nara hanging a saddle on a freshly built rack, while Taya was splitting firewood right in the middle of the yard with an axe. "What the hell are you doing?" Elias barked. Sila did not even look up, still working on rebuilding the fence. "We are fixing what you have neglected." Elias bit down on his cigarette and said nothing. He knew they were not going to listen to him anyway. All day, the 6 women worked without rest. Luma was clearing weeds around the garden. Wika inspected the trail that led into the ranch. Anya climbed down into the well and scrubbed away the moss and algae. By midday, when Elias brought the cattle back, he found the barn swept clean, the water troughs filled, and the hay stacked neatly. Even the barn roof had been patched to keep the wind out. He stood for a moment, hands on his hips. The ranch had not been this orderly since his wife and child were gone. That evening, the 6 women built a large fire. Venison sizzled on skewers, and the rich smell filled the yard. Elias sat on the porch, trying to ignore it, but his stomach was already growling. Anya walked over and placed a piece of meat on a wooden slab beside him. "Eat," she said plainly. Elias stared at it, but in the end, he took it. "You are not my boss," Anya just shrugged. "Of course not." Her answer left Elias speechless, though the corner of his mouth twitched upward ever so slightly. That night, soft laughter echoed from the fire. Wicca was telling a story in her native tongue, and the others giggled quietly. Elias lay in bed, listening to the sound drifting through the window. It had been a long time since laughter was heard on the ranch. The next morning, when Elias walked out into the yard, he saw a homemade mousetrap placed right by the hay storage. "Who made this?" "Wicca," Selah replied. "Your storage will not have mice anymore." Elias scratched his chin and said nothing. He only realized he had stopped snapping at them. The ranch no longer felt empty. It was coming back to life, in a way he never expected. Rumors spread like dry fire. Within just a few days, the entire town of Cinderbrush was whispering about how Elias Ward is keeping 6 Apache women on his land. One afternoon, with the sun still hanging in the sky, the thunder of hooves echoed in the distance. Elias was tying a rope when 4 riders came through the gate. Leading them was Hank Dobbs, the saloon owner, known for stirring up trouble. Hank pulled his horse to a stop, glancing around the yard like he was inspecting property that belonged to him. "Ward," he drawled, "the town does not like the sight of you harboring 6 squaws out here. It is stirring up problems. You ought to clear them out before trouble finds you." Elias stood upright, one hand resting casually on the grip of his rifle. "This is my land. Who works here is my business." Hank spat on the ground and let out a dry laugh. "It is not just your business. Folks do not want them around. They bring trouble." Before Elias could reply, Selah stepped out from the stable. Her shadow stretched long across the ground, her muscles glistening with sweat. Behind her, Nara, Taya, Luma, Wika, and Anya emerged one by one, forming a line. No one spoke, but their eyes sliced through the riders like blades. The air turned heavy. Only the wind and the quiet snorts of the horses filled the silence. "You are bringing trouble on yourself, Ward," Hank said, his gaze flicking to the 6 women. "When they turn on you, you will not have time to regret it." Elias lifted the Winchester off his shoulder, not pointing it, but holding it firmly across his chest. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Anyone takes one more step past that fence, they are not walking back out." Hank stared at him for a long moment, then let out a dry chuckle. "Fine, but you will be hearing from us soon." The 4 riders turned their horses and galloped away, leaving a cloud of red dust behind. Elias lowered the rifle and looked back at the 6 women. Selah gave him a single nod, a silent thank you. That evening, they worked quietly, but something in the air had changed. This was no longer about repaying a debt. Now, they stood together in the face of a real threat. "I am deeply grateful to have you here." If this story brought back old memories, dusty afternoons, the sound of hooves echoing in your chest, then subscribe to my channel, so that each day we can sit together once more, and I will tell you another tale from the West. The next night, the sky was pitch black, not a single star in sight. Elias was cleaning his rifle inside the cabin when the sharp smell of smoke suddenly hit his nose. He jumped up, shoved the door open, and ran out onto the porch. Flames were bursting from the hay storage on the east side of the yard. The bales of straw ignited like torches, casting a blazing red light across the entire ranch. "Nara!" Elias roared, grabbing a water bucket. Nara and Taya were already running toward the blaze before he even reached the shed. The 3 of them charged into the fire, dousing it with water. Taya shoveled dirt onto the burning hay, sending thick black smoke swirling into the air. Sila was leading the panicked cattle away, while Luma and Wika passed buckets of water from the well in a steady rhythm. Anya climbed up onto the roof and tore down the burning torches still clinging to the rafters. Elias choked and coughed. Sweat and ash plastered across his face, but he did not stop. Finally, the fire died out, leaving only thick smoke and a smoldering, blackened pile of straw. They collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. Selah picked up a half-burned scrap of cloth from the dirt and held it up for Elias to see. It was a piece of shirt, marked with the symbol of the Dobbs gang. "This is a warning," Selah said, her voice low. Elias clenched his fists. "No, they want us gone." That very night, they began fortifying the ranch. Elias built a small watch post by the fence and placed the Winchester rifle on it. Selah and Nara dug trenches around the hay storage to redirect water in case of fire. Luma hung tribal herb bundles around the yard, part charm, part message to outsiders. This ranch is watched. By dawn, as the last tasks were finally done, Elias stood on the porch, watching the 6 women sitting around the fire. Their skin was streaked with soot, hair tangled and damp with sweat, but their eyes were bright with fire. The full moon rose high, casting a pale silver glow across the fields. Elias stood atop the watchpost, eyes sweeping over the newly reinforced fence. Down in the yard, the 6 women sat around a small fire, weapons within arm's reach. No one spoke. The silence was tight, like a bowstring drawn just before release. The sound of hoofbeats echoed steadily, then stopped just beyond the gate. 4 riders appeared under the moonlight, their shadows stretched long like ghosts. They did not charge in, they just watched. One of them, Hank Dobbs, let out a cold chuckle. "Ward," he shouted. "Last chance. Send them away, or we will burn your whole damn ranch." Elias raised his Winchester, the barrel catching the moonlight like polished steel. "If you set 1 foot past that fence, I will shoot." Selah stood beside the post, holding the revolver Elias had given her earlier that day. She fired a single shot into the air, the crack echoing through the valley. Hank's horse reared, neighing loudly. He clenched his jaw but did not advance. "We will be back," Hank growled. "Next time, it won't be a warning." The 4 riders turned and galloped away, leaving behind a strip of red cloth tied to the gate. A clear challenge. Elias climbed down, picked up the cloth, and threw it into the fire. The flames rose, swallowing it whole like a declaration of war. "Tomorrow, they will come back with more," Nara said, her eyes locked on the horizon. Elias nodded. "Then we will be ready." That night, they worked until nearly dawn, stacking sandbags at the doors, digging deeper trenches, and setting up wooden stakes as barriers. Wicca planted sharp spikes around the perimeter, while Anya sharpened blades until the steel gleamed under the moonlight. By first light, Elias stood in the middle of the yard, surveying the work. The ranch now looked like a small fortress, ready for a siege. He glanced at the 6 women, clothes streaked with mud, soaked in sweat. But no one complained. In their eyes, Elias saw something familiar. The look of people who had made up their minds not to back down. He smiled softly, for the first time in years, feeling that he was no longer alone. He realized they were no longer just those repaying a debt. They had become a part of this land. That night, the wind began to howl, carrying the scent of a sandstorm sweeping across the prairie. Elias sat alone in the cabin, his Winchester rifle resting across his knees. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. The door creaked open quietly. Selah stepped inside, her shadow stretching across the wooden floor. "You are not sleeping?" Elias shook his head. "I have been thinking. Tomorrow they will come back, maybe in greater numbers. I do not want any of you to die here." Selah crossed her arms, her eyes darkening. "You are telling us to leave?" "Yes." Elias stood, his voice low. "If you go before dawn, they will not have time to surround the place. I will hold them off on my own." A chair scraped behind him. Nara, Taya, and the others were already standing at the doorway. Taya's voice was sharp. "You think we are children? We have faced enemies before. We know how to fight." Elias looked around at the 6 faces, each one burning with fire. "I do not want to watch any of you die for this land." Selah stepped closer, now standing right in front of him. "Do you not get it, Ward? We are not going anywhere. This is already home." Silence. Only the wind whistling through the cracks in the door. At last, Elias sighed and set the Winchester down on the table. "Then tomorrow, we fight. But we work as a team. I do not give orders, and none of you leave me behind." Selah nodded. "A team," she said, and held out her hand. One by one, the others laid their hands atop hers. Nara, Luma, Wicca, Anya, and Taya. Finally, Elias placed his calloused hand on top. No more words were needed. In that moment, an unspoken pact was made. They would hold this land to the last drop of blood. The rest of the night passed in silence. They sat around the hearth, preparing bullets, sharpening blades, sipping water in measured swallows, each in their own corner, yet their eyes met often across the flickering fire. No longer 6 strangers and 1 lonely rancher. At first light, Elias stepped out onto the porch, gazing across the misty field. For the first time in years, he felt he had a reason to defend this place, not just for the land, but for the ones who had chosen to stay. The next dawn blazed red, painting the entire field the color of blood. Elias stood atop the watchpost, his Winchester fully loaded. Down below, the 6 women were ready. Taya gripped a knife. Selah and Nara held rifles. Luma, Wicca, and Anya stood armed with clubs and bows. No one said a word, the silence broken only by the flapping of the flag on the gate in the wind. The sound of hoofbeats rumbled like thunder. More than a dozen riders approached, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Hank Dobbs rode in front, smirking. "Ward, time to end this little game," he shouted. Elias did not answer. He raised the Winchester, bracing it tight against his shoulder. A warning shot rang out, the bullet slamming into a wooden post just inches from Hank's horse. "Fire!" Hank yelled, firing the first shot. Bullets ripped through the air, striking the window shields. Elias returned fire, knocking the hat clean off the rider next to Hank. At the same time, Selah fired her revolver, and Taya flung her dagger, cutting the reins of a horse that reared up in panic. Gun smoke filled the yard. Wicca and Anya rushed from the side, swinging their clubs at the legs of a rider who had just jumped off his horse. He screamed and ran. After a few fierce minutes, the attackers began to falter. Hank cursed, turning his horse. "We will be back," he shouted. but the sound of galloping faded into the distance, leaving only dust and the sharp sting of gunpowder in the air. Elias lowered the Winchester, heart pounding. He looked back at the 6 women, hair tangled, faces streaked with sweat and soot, but their eyes burned with the fire of victory. "It is over," Elias said, his voice hoarse. That afternoon, the group worked together to repair the broken section of the fence, stacking new wooden stakes and filling the rebuilt shed with hay. Luma planted a row of corn in front of the porch, while Wika carved a tribal symbol into the gate, a bold declaration. This is home. As the sun dipped low, they sat on the porch steps, watching the horizon burn with the colors of sunset. Elias lit a cigarette, exhaling a long plume of smoke. "This ranch is no longer mine alone," he said. Selah sat beside him, her shoulders still dusted with dirt, and gave a quiet nod. "And no one is going to take it from us." The sunset cast its golden shadow over the 7 of them sitting side by side. For the first time, Elias felt that this land was truly a home, not just for him, but for a family built with blood, sweat, and the will to stand strong. True happiness in the West is not found in gold or land, but in the moment when hands meet after a long day, when you sit beneath a burning sky and know you are no longer alone. Love out here does not need promises. Just a shared look of understanding, a shared fence, a shared fight, and the quiet trust that tomorrow will come. Together, it has been an honor to ride with you, my dear friends of Wild West storytelling. I hope your life is always filled with happiness and peace. I love you all. Let me know what you think of this story in the comments below. Tap the number 1 if you enjoyed it, and do not forget to subscribe channel for more thrilling tales from the Wild West. Matthew stopped. Just beyond the fence, a figure was struggling to crawl forward. The dusty ground was smeared red with blood beneath the bare, muscular arm of an Apache woman. Her black hair was a tangled mess, and her dark eyes shone with desperation but also with defiance. She was gasping for breath, each inhale trembling. Every time she tried to lift herself, the wound at her hip bled anew. As Matthew stepped closer, still gripping his rifle tightly, she looked up at him. Her lips were dry and cracked, but her English, though hesitant, was firm. "Please, do not let them take me back. I will do anything if you save me." Their eyes met through the haze of dust. Matthew saw exhaustion written all over her, but he also saw a fire in those eyes that refused to die. Part of him wanted to turn away. He knew full well that bringing a wounded Apache girl into his home was the same as inviting trouble through the front door. But still, his feet moved one step forward. Outside, the desert wind hissed through the rusted wire fence. In that moment, Matthew knew the long silence that had settled over his ranch was about to end. Matthew pulled the wooden gate open and lifted the Apache woman over the fence. In his arms, her body was heavy and solid like that of a warrior, but growing colder from blood loss. He laid her down on the small bed inside the wooden shack, the flickering light from the oil lamp revealing wounds left by both knife and bullet. "Sana." He heard her whisper her name before slipping into unconsciousness. She curled up, still clutching the broken knife tightly in her hand, as if letting go would mean her soul would be taken away. Matthew sighed and unwrapped the filthy cloth tied around her hip, cleaning the wound with water from the river. She let out a faint groan, her eyes barely opening, filled with wary suspicion. "What are you going to do?" Her voice was hoarse and strained. Matthew did not answer. He simply tied the wound tightly with a strip of clean cloth. He had done this many times before. His hands were no strangers to blood. But this time was different. This was Apache blood, the blood of someone considered the enemy by everyone on the frontier. All through the night, Sana barely slept. Every time Matthew closed his eyes, he heard her shift, the soft clink of metal as the broken knife hit the floor. She was alert like a wild animal backed into a corner. The next morning, when Matthew went to the well to draw water, he noticed fresh horse tracks pressed into the soil near the riverbank. These were not from cattle. They belonged to pursuers. He stood there for a long time, gripping the dipper tightly, his heart heavy as stone. Back in the shack, he found Sana sitting up. Her face was pale, but her eyes burned with fire. "They will not stop," she said, her voice rasping but steady. Matthew placed the bowl of water in front of her. "I know," he replied, his gray eyes cold and clear. In that moment, they both understood. Sana's presence had brought danger right to the doorstep, but amidst the suspicion and tension, a fragile thread of trust had just been tied, starting with a quiet act of bandaging a wound in a bowl of water placed at just the right time. Outside, the prairie remained silent, but for Matthew, his ranch was no longer at peace. At noon, the sun blazed like fire. On the roof of the shack, Matthew tried to keep his balance as he replaced the rotting wooden planks. He was used to hard labor, but today felt different because down below, Sana sat quietly, her eyes following his every move. She still held the broken knife in her hand, but the sharp edge in her gaze from the night before had softened. Suddenly, a loud crack split the air. The plank beneath Matthew gave way, and he lost his footing. His body dropped, heavy and fast, falling off the roof. But instead of hitting the ground, he was stopped by a sudden force. Sana had dashed forward, her strong arms catching him mid-fall. The impact sent both of them tumbling onto the dry grass, dust rising in a cloud around them. For a moment, Matthew lay close beside her, their breaths tangled in the sweltering heat. Sana was breathing hard, her eyes wide, her arms still tense from the effort. They were so close, close enough for Matthew to hear the steady, powerful rhythm of her heartbeat. Neither of them spoke, then both let out a quiet laugh, a strange sound in a place so used to silence and solitude. That evening, as they sat beside the fire, Sana spoke first. Her voice was low and even, but each word seemed etched into the air. I once had a family, a father, a mother, brothers. They were all killed in a single night of raiding. I was captured, tied up, and sold again and again. If I had not escaped, I would probably be dead by now. She did not cry. She only stared into the flames, her dark eyes as deep and still as the bottom of a canyon. Matthew listened, his calloused hands gripping his knees tightly. You do not have to keep running here, he said softly. I lost my wife and son too. Fever took them in just a few days. This house, it used to feel emptier than the desert. Sana turned to look at him, her eyes still guarded but beginning to soften. They said nothing more. Instead, they gathered firewood together and cooked a thin soup. For the first time, she ate her full portion without hesitation. Later, as Matthew was washing the bowls, Sana quietly picked up a strip of cloth and stepped toward him. Give me your hand. He looked surprised, but then held out the hand scraped and bloodied from the fall earlier. Sana wrapped the cloth tightly around the cut. Her touch was firm, but gentle, and it made Matthew glance up. Their eyes met in the flickering orange light of the fire. No words were needed, they had shared their wounds. One had lost a family to war, the other to disease and violence. And in that silence, the first true seed of trust was planted. The next morning, the sky was draped in a thin layer of gray clouds. The sunlight was hidden, casting an oddly pale and washed-out light. Matthew stepped outside, his boots sinking into the soft ground. He had planned to check the southern fence after the rain from the night before. But as he reached the gate, something made him stop in his tracks. Hoofprints, fresh ones, dark soil pressed down in the shape of horseshoes, heading straight toward the ranch before vanishing behind the hill. Beside them were deep wheel tracks, wagon wheels, and not his own. Matthew crouched down, his calloused fingers brushing the imprint as he measured it. They were here less than a day ago, he murmured. He turned back, his face noticeably more tense. Sana was rinsing the copper pot in a basin of water, her thick black hair falling over her shoulders. Her muscular back was solid, but her eyes still carried caution. When she saw him, she looked up and instantly recognized the tension in his expression. What is it? Her voice was hoarse, low, but firm. Not animals, people. And they are hunting, Matthew replied, his eyes shifting toward the hill. No more words were needed. Sana understood. Slave traders, the ones who had once chained her in iron and treated her like property. Her expression shifted, not to fear but to a long-buried, simmering rage. Matthew opened the grain shed and pulled out his old Winchester rifle, wiping off the layer of dust. He pushed a box of cartridges toward her. Sana looked at it, then slowly picked it up. He stepped closer, placing his hand on the stock of the rifle, showing her how to rack a round into the chamber, how to brace the butt against her shoulder to lessen the recoil. She listened carefully, her large, steady hands gripping the cold steel. By late afternoon, they began reinforcing the shack. Matthew sawed whatever planks were still usable and stacked sandbags against the windows. Sana dragged heavy logs into place, building a secondary barrier, her skin beaded with sweat under the bronze sundae. They worked side by side, saying little, but every movement was made with the same purpose, preparing for what was coming. At night, the wind howled through the mountain pass, and the chirping of crickets filled the silence. Sana sat close to the fire, the broken knife beside her foot. Matthew sat across from her, the Winchester within reach. He looked at her sitting tall, her dark eyes unwavering. "Sana," Matthew said softly, "if they come, you can go. Head west, past the stream. You will have a better chance." She looked up, firelight dancing in her eyes, proud, but also pained. "I have spent my whole life running. If they come, I will stay. I will fight with you." Her answer silenced Matthew. He nodded slowly, a quiet agreement spoken without words. Outside, the night was thick and still, but inside the shack, the fire flickered, casting shadows of two people on the dirt walls, a lone rancher and a muscled Apache warrior. They were no longer just a fugitive and a host. They had become allies, standing together on the same side. Thank you for being here with me. If this story reminded you of days gone by, dusty evenings, and the echo of hooves pounding in your chest, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, so that every day we can sit down together again. And I will tell you another tale from the Old West. The next morning, the sun shone brightly, chasing away the damp chill of the night. Dew still clung to the grass, glistening like tiny beads of glass. Matthew was up early, as always, his body long used to working from the break of dawn. He was heading toward the cattle pen when he saw Sana already there. She was trying to push a stray calf back inside the fence. Her tall, solid frame strained as she wrapped her arms around the stubborn creature, beads of sweat forming on her brow despite the cool morning air. Matthew stood still for a moment, just watching. An Apache woman, once chained and sold, now quietly helping him tend the herd, not out of debt but out of choice. Once the calf was back in the pen, Sana stood panting, her gaze meeting Matthew's. They said nothing, just nodded to each other. A quiet moment of mutual recognition. They began spending more time together. Sana helped him pull weeds along the fence line, her calloused hands bleeding slightly as she tightened the barbed wire. Matthew silently wrapped a cloth around her finger. "Be careful," he murmured, his voice rough. Sana gave a faint smile, rare, but it lit up her scarred and dusty face. One afternoon, Matthew climbed back onto the roof to repair some rotting boards. A strong wind blew through, and one of the planks snapped beneath his feet. He slipped, his heavy body falling. In a flash, a strong arm caught him. Sana had been standing right below. The impact sent them both crashing into the grass, dust swirling around them. Matthew, dazed, realized he had landed on top of her. Sana looked up at him, her breathing heavy, her dark eyes deep and steady. Time seemed to freeze. He quickly pulled away, but the moment lingered, an unexpected closeness they both clearly felt. That night, as a light rain fell, they sat together by the fire. Sana let down her wet hair, long black strands falling over her broad shoulders. Matthew handed her a cup of hot tea, the steam curling in the air between them. He began to speak of his past, how disease had taken his wife and son, how loneliness had followed him ever since. Sana listened in silence, her eyes softer now, no longer guarded like before. When it was her turn, she told him about her family, murdered in a raid, about the years she spent in captivity, the relentless beatings, the scars that no one saw. Her voice did not tremble, only rasped with buried pain. When she finished, Matthew said nothing. He simply laid his rough hand gently on the back of hers, and Sana did not pull away. The fire cast their shadows on the wooden wall behind them, two figures who had once been strangers, now sitting close together. A bond had begun to form, not from pity, but from shared understanding and deep empathy. In the quiet of the rainy night, Matthew knew this truth. He was no longer just protecting a guest. He was learning how to live again because of Sana. Late in the afternoon, the sky turned a deep shade of red, and hot winds from the desert swept in, carrying layers of dust. Matthew was tying up the horse pen when the old dog suddenly barked loud and sharp, its fur standing on end. He looked up, instinctively tightening his grip on the hammer. On the trail leading to the ranch, 3 riders appeared, dark silhouettes in the swirling red dust. Santa stepped out from the grain shed, still holding a bucket of water. One glance was enough. She knew exactly who they were. Her black eyes flared with hatred, her hand gripping the bucket handle so tightly her knuckles turned white. "They found me," she said, her voice low and hoarse, laced with both fear and fierce resolve. The three riders stopped at the fence. The one in front, a bearded man, shouted out, "Mercer, we know you're hiding something that ain't yours. Hand over the Apache woman, and we walk away." Matthew stood tall, wiped his hands on his pants, then lifted the Winchester from the porch. He stepped forward, his eyes cold as iron. "This is my land. She does not belong to you." The air was tight as a drawn wire. Another man smirked, a cigarette hanging from his mouth. "How long do you think you can hold out? Just you against the whole town? They paid us to bring her back, dead or alive. It makes no difference." By now, Sana had stepped up beside Matthew. Her tall, broad-shouldered figure stood strong against the fading sunlight. She was no longer hiding behind anyone. Her eyes blazed like fire. "I am not someone's property. If you want me, come and get me." The bearded man spat on the ground and started to nudge his horse forward, but the sharp click of a rifle chambering a round stopped him cold. Matthew had raised the Winchester, his voice steady and low. "One more step, and someone's not going home." In that moment, the wind died. Both sides locked eyes, tension buzzing in the air. Only the sound of pounding hearts and hooves scraping the dirt remained. Finally, the bearded man raised his hand. "We walk away for today, but next time, it won't just be three of us." They turned their horses, slowly fading into the red dust. Santa let out a breath, but her eyes stayed alert, sharp. Matthew placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice tight. "They'll be back, and we need to be ready." That night, neither of them slept. They stacked sandbags at the windows, reinforced the doors, hid pistols beneath the table. Sana sat sharpening her curved blade, the steel flashing in the firelight. Matthew loaded rounds into the rifle and murmured, "From now on, this isn't just a ranch. This is our fortress." Outside, the darkness stretched thick across the land. But inside the little cabin, the firelight danced across two faces, one of a man who had lost everything, and one of a warrior cast aside. For the first time, neither of them felt alone. Night fell, and the Arizona sky was pitch black like a torn oilcloth stretched across the heavens. Inside the small cabin, the firelight flickered across Sana's face, casting shadows over the scars on her shoulder and the cold dark intensity in her eyes. She was not sleeping. Instead, her strong hands were wrapping leather straps tightly around her arm, the knife laid out in front of her, sharpening again and again until the blade gleamed. Matthew, after finishing up at the cattle pen, stepped inside and stood in silence. He understood exactly what was happening. She was not planning to run, she intended to face them head on. He did not need to ask. He saw the fire of resolve burning in her eyes. "What are you planning to do?" he asked, voice gravelly. Sana did not look up. Her answer was short and solid. "I will end this before they reach the gate." Matthew sighed. He walked over, unstrapped his rifle, and placed it on the table in front of her. "If you are truly going, take this with you. It will keep you alive longer than that knife." She froze. For the first time, her eyes flickered. He went on, his voice like steel. "But if you choose to stay, then use it and stand beside me. We will defend this place together. I need someone to fight with." Silence settled over the room. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the door, carrying the scent of iron and dust. Santa looked at the rifle. Then she looked at him. One heartbeat. Two. And then she drove the knife into the table and gripped the rifle tight. "All right," she said, her voice low and steady like a war drum. "I will not run. If I fall, I will fall here, next to you." Matthew gave a slow nod, the corner of his mouth curling into a tired but fierce smile. That night, they sat back to back on the wooden floor, cleaning their weapons, loading each round with care. No grand vows were spoken, but in the silence, an unspoken promise was forged whether in life or in death. Neither of them would face it alone. Before dawn had a chance to break, the ground was already trembling beneath the thunder of hooves. Clouds of dust rolled in with the wind, swallowing the ranch fence in a red haze. Matthew and Santa stood on the cabin porch, rifles fully loaded, eyes locked on the front gate. On the hill, three riders emerged in the pale morning light, Fisk and his men. They rode down slowly, their sinister faces shadowed beneath wide-brimmed hats. "Hand her over, Mercer," Fisk shouted, his voice tearing through the silence. "She doesn't belong to you." Matthew tightened his grip on the rifle. "She doesn't belong to you either. This is my land, and she chose to stay. If you want her, come across that fence and see what happens." Fisk did not wait. He raised his gun. The shot cracked through the air, a splinter of wood embedding itself into the cabin post. Sana dropped to one knee, aimed, and returned fire. Her bullet ripped through the wind and brought down one of the men's horses, sending him crashing to the ground. The gunfight erupted. Bullets flew. Wood shattered. Matthew rolled behind the wall and fired in bursts. Sana darted toward the horse pen, her muscled arms swinging open the windbreak gate to use as cover. In the flashes of muzzle fire, her face blazed fierce and radiant like a battle goddess. Fisk tried to push forward but was stopped short by a warning shot from Matthew that hit the ground inches from his boot. He froze, sweat pouring down his face. What shook him was not the gun, it was the sight of two people standing shoulder to shoulder, unwavering. "Get off my land, Fisk," Matthew roared. "Next time, we won't be firing warnings." The outlaw snarled, then pulled his men back. The sound of hooves faded into the distance, giving way to a heavy silence. Sana stood breathless, rifle still in hand. Matthew stepped over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over." She looked at him, and in her coal-black eyes was more than survival, there was a choice, carved deep and certain. Weeks passed. The cabin began to change. Together, they rebuilt the horse pen, patched the roof, and stretched new fencing. Sana hauled water. Matthew hammered wood. And when the sun dipped low, they sat together on the porch not as strangers, not as savior and rescued, but as partners. In the green field beyond, horses grazed peacefully. Matthew leaned against the fence. Sana leaned against him. Far in the distance, the horizon glowed crimson, no scent of gunpowder now, only peace. They had not won by killing their enemies, but by choosing to live together. Folks, sometimes it's not the fastest draw that wins, but the one who dares to hold on to someone they trust. A rancher and an Apache woman, standing side by side, proved that true justice does not need bloodshed. It only needs the courage to choose love and kindness in a harsh desert. It has been an honor riding alongside you, dear listeners of Wild West storytelling. I truly hope your life is filled with joy and peace. I love y'all. Let me know what you thought of this story. Drop a comment down below. Hit one if you enjoyed this tale. And do not forget to subscribe channel for more thrilling stories from the Wild West. A tall figure slowly emerged, a muscular Apache woman with broad shoulders, her arms trembling as she held a scrawny boy tightly against her chest. Sweat, dirt, and fresh wounds streaked across her bronze-toned skin. Her black eyes did not look down. Instead, they locked onto Elias with a fierce determination, tinged with desperation. She stood at the fence, panting, then spoke clearly in a hoarse voice. "Let me be your wife. I will meet your every need. In exchange for food for my son." Elias froze. Her offer landed like the thud of a hoe striking dry earth. It was not a plea for mercy, but a deal raw, reckless, yet brimming with pride. He glanced at the boy barely clinging to life in his mother's arms. The hunger to survive was etched into every shallow breath. Slowly, Elias opened the gate and extended his hand. "Come in. Stay the night in the stable. Eat first. Tomorrow, we will talk about the rest." The wooden gate closed behind them, marking the beginning of a story neither of them could have foreseen. In the old stable, the flickering light of the oil lamp cast long shadows on the gray wooden walls. Awanada sat leaning against a post, her bare shoulders damp with sweat. One muscular arm loosely wrapped in a torn piece of cloth to cover a wound. Her child lay curled up in an old blanket Elias had hurriedly pulled from a chest. The boy slept fitfully, his lips cracked and dry, his chest rising and falling with fragile breaths. Elias sat on the porch, his rifle resting across his lap. He was a man used to silence, but the sound of the mother and child breathing in the darkness weighed on his heart like stone. In his mind, the woman's words repeated over and over. "Let me be your wife." It had not sounded like a plea. It had been a challenge against the brutal life they both had come to know. As the chirping of crickets blended with the whistle of wind against the fence, Awanada stepped outside. She was tall, her walk slightly uneven from her scraped feet. In the lantern's glow, the veins stood out on her strong arms. Yet her eyes were not the eyes of a fierce warrior, they were the eyes of a desperate mother. She stood facing Elias, her voice deep and hoarse, yet steady. I am not asking for pity. I was once a warrior of my tribe, but they wanted me to marry an old chief I did not love. I refused, and they cast me out. This boy, they said he has no place in the village. Elias stared at her, the corners of his eyes marked by hardened lines. He had lost a wife and a young daughter to disease, and in her gaze, he saw the pain he himself had once carried. You came here, looking for a home, or just shelter for the night? Elias asked. Awanada bit her lips softly before answering. I want to live, and I want my boy to grow up free. If I must trade my own body for that, then I am willing. The night wind slipped through the cracks in the door, carrying the scent of sun-scorched hay. Elias gripped the rifle tighter, his chest burning like embers stirred from old ashes. He made no promises, but his eyes had softened. And in that moment, between a lonely rancher and an abandoned warrior woman, an invisible thread quietly pulled them closer together. At dawn the next morning, the first light of day spilled across the weathered roof tiles. Elias opened the stable door, carrying a bowl of hot corn porridge. Awanada had been up for a while. She stood in the yard, her rough hands pulling up a bucket of water from the well, her biceps flexing under the strain. The boy sat on the steps, his large, dark eyes fixed on his mother as if he could not bear to look away. Elias paused for a moment. He was not used to seeing a woman work with that kind of brute strength. Every movement she made was precise, raw, and untamed, not unlike the warriors he had once faced during his years in the military. But today, all of that power was being used just to draw water, to wash her face, and cook porridge for her son. Awanada looked up, sweat trailing down her sun-darkened face. Thank you for the food, she said. Her voice was deep and hoarse, but her eyes held a pride that refused to be broken. Elias simply nodded, placing the bowl in front of the boy. The child glanced at his mother before lowering his head to eat, taking small spoonfuls with trembling, skinny hands. In the days that followed, silence gradually gave way to gestures of trust. Awanada began helping Elias with the heavy work mending the fence, hauling bundles of hay, cleaning out the grain shed. The muscles on her shoulders stood out firm and strong. But Elias noticed the gentleness in the way she always looked back to check on her son, making sure he was never left behind. One afternoon, as Elias struggled to tie down a broken beam, the rope suddenly snapped back, lashing his arm. Blood welled up instantly, and he gritted his teeth, swearing under his breath. Awanada rushed over, grabbing his wrist and pressing down to stop the bleeding. Her hands were rough and calloused, but the warmth of her grip made Elias fall silent. They looked at each other. In that gaze, there was no longer a divide between white man and Apache. There were only two people who had both lost much, now trying to rebuild a sliver of fragile peace. That night, by the fire, they sat beside each other without speaking. The child slept soundly in his blanket, his breathing steady. Elias slowly turned the rifle resting on his lap, while Awanada sat wrapped in a fur blanket, the firelight casting shadows across her scarred and proud face. A different kind of silence settled around them, not the silence of loneliness, but the silence of something beginning. Late in the afternoon, the sun blazed down over the field of scorched yellow grass. Elias and Awanada were herding the cattle back toward the barn. The little boy trotted behind them, clutching a calf in his arms like it was a treasure. Everything seemed peaceful, until, in the distance, red dust began to rise, signaling the approach of unwanted visitors. Elias frowned, raising a hand to shield his eyes as he looked down the trail. 3 riders were galloping toward the ranch, the tips of their spears and the barrels of their rifles glinting in the sunset. He immediately pulled the boy close and lowered his voice. Get inside, now. Awanada did not hesitate. She scooped up her son and ran toward the cabin, while Elias stepped in front of the gate, rifle at the ready across his arms. The riders halted, stirring up a cloud of dust. The one in front, a tall, wiry Apache warrior with a long scar down his cheek, stared at Elias, then glanced toward Awanada's silhouette. He spoke in broken English. That woman belongs to the tribe. You cannot keep her. Elias clenched his jaw, his voice gravelly and firm. She does not belong to anyone. This is my land. Anyone who crosses that fence better be ready to face the consequences. The scarred man let out a laugh cold and sharp. He jerked his chin toward the cabin. She refused the chief. That is betrayal. The tribe wants punishment. If you hide her, you are an enemy too. The air grew thick. The wind carried with it the scent of dry dust and looming danger. Elias gripped his rifle tighter, sweat soaking the back of his neck. Every muscle in his arms tensed, ready to fire if it came to that. Inside the cabin, Awanada set her son down on a chair, then stepped out onto the porch, not hiding. Her sun-bronzed shoulders were bare, old scars visible beneath the blazing red sunset. Her voice rang out clear, firm, and unwavering. I choose freedom. I choose to stay. The warriors exchanged glances, silent for a long moment. Then the scarred man spat on the ground and growled, "We will return. And next time, it will not be so easy." They turned their horses and rode off, leaving behind a storm of red dust. Elias slowly lowered his rifle, his breath heavy. He knew the fragile piece had shattered. From now on, every day would feel like standing at the edge of a cliff. Awanada walked up to him, her calloused hand resting on his arm. The touch was not for comfort, it was a silent vow. She would stand and fight beside him, no matter what awaited. Thank you for being here. If this story reminded you of old times of dusty afternoons and the echo of hooves pounding in your chest, go ahead and subscribe to my channel, so that each day, we can sit together again. And I will tell you another story from the Wild West. After the day of confrontation, the ranch sank into a quiet tension. Elias carefully checked every door, every bullet in the chest. Awanada, instead of hiding away in the cabin, threw herself even harder into the work as if to prove she was not a burden. One evening, as the sky dipped into sunset, they worked side by side, mending a broken fence. Elias held the wooden post tight, sweat trailing down his back. Awanada, her bronze skin stretched over rippling muscles, tied thick leather cord around the beam. Each time she pulled hard, the muscles in her arms flexed like they were challenging the burning red sky behind her. The little boy sat on the grass, giggling as he played with the dirt. For the first time in years, Elias heard the laughter of a child in his yard, a sound he thought had forever vanished the day he lost his daughter. As he was fastening the cord, the rope suddenly snapped back, whipping across Elias's sunburnt arm. A red line of blood appeared. He clenched his teeth but said nothing. Instantly, Awanada dropped what she was doing and stepped over, gripping his wrist. Her calloused hand was rough, but warm, pressing down to stop the bleeding. They stood close. Awanada's deep black eyes locked onto Elias's steel-gray ones. In that moment, neither spoke, but something between them burned away the remaining distance. Elias saw in her eyes not only pride, but exhaustion and a quiet longing to lean on someone, just once. That night, after a simple dinner of stewed beans and corn cakes, the three of them sat beside the fire. The boy curled up on his mother's lap, sound asleep. The flames crackled, casting their shadows large against the wooden walls of the cabin. Elias poured himself a sip of corn whiskey, then quietly slid the cup toward Awanada. She looked at him, hesitated briefly, then took a small sip. The sharp burn made the corner of her lips curl slightly, and for the first time, Elias caught a fleeting, half-formed smile. No words were needed. Elias reached out his hand. Slowly, Awanada placed her large, strong hand into his. That hand had killed, had fought, had defied fate, but now, it trembled. Their first kiss came naturally. It was not loud, not rushed. Only warmth, the warmth of two people who had been broken, now finding something missing in one another, by the firelight of a western night. That night, they said nothing. But both knew loneliness no longer ruled this cabin. Early the next morning, just as the sun peeked over the Rocky Mountains, Elias heard the distant rumble of hooves. The ground trembled slightly, and red dust rose thick into the air. He immediately loaded his Winchester rifle to full capacity, his eyes cold as steel, locked on the trail ahead. Awanada stepped onto the porch beside him, her bare, solid shoulders steady, and her deep black eyes showing no fear. Within minutes, over a dozen Apache warriors rode in, lining up across the gate. Their faces were painted in red and black, hair braided and tied, spears and rifles gleaming under the morning sunday. Leading them was Gray Elk, a tall elder with silver hair adorned with feathers and eyes as stern as carved stone. Beside him was the scarred man from the day before. Gray Elk's voice rang out, Awanada, the tribe calls you back. The chief has waited. We do not allow our traditions to be broken. Awanada stepped forward from the porch, her muscled arm revealing an old scar. Her voice thundered louder than the horse's cries. I choose freedom. I choose to stay with this man and my son. The tribe has no claim on me anymore. The air thickened, silent and tense. Some of the warriors gripped their weapons tightly. Horses neighed and shifted restlessly. Elias stepped up, raising his rifle high. His voice was low and gravelly. She stays. This is my land. Anyone who crosses that fence will not leave alive. The words cut through the air like a blade. A few warriors moved to spur their horses, but Gray Elk raised a hand to stop them. He stared directly at Elias, his aged eyes sharp and piercing. You think you can stand against the whole tribe? We could turn your cabin to ash before the sun sets. Elias did not blink. Maybe. But before you do, I will take a few of you to the grave with me. Try me. The silence that followed was tight as a drawn bow. Then, slowly, Gray Elk lowered his hand and spoke with deliberate calm. There will be no blood spilled here today. The council will meet. The decision will come by the full moon. With that, the riders turned their horses. The red dust rose again, swirling like a retreating storm. Awanada watched them go, her eyes filled with both pain and pride. Elias rested his hand on the rifle, then slowly turned to her. They will come back, but this time, either we stand our ground, or we lose everything. In the morning light, the two of them stood side by side before the small cabin, knowing the real storm was only just beginning. That night, rain swept down from the distant mountains, lightning slashing across the sky like glowing wounds. Inside the small cabin, Elias sat silently by the fire, his hand gripping an old hunting knife. Awanada stood on the porch, rain soaking her muscled shoulders, her long black hair clinging to her face. The boy slept soundly in the corner of the room, his breathing steady, completely unaware of the other storm gathering just outside. Elias knew what she was thinking, and then he saw Awanada quietly step into the yard, carrying a small blanket and a leather pouch filled with dried food. His heart clenched. Elias stood up and rushed out, grabbing her arm tightly. "Where do you think you are going?" he asked, his voice hoarse against the rain. Awanada turned back, pain glimmering in her dark eyes. "If I stay, you will lose everything: your land, your ranch, even your life. I cannot let you bear the burden of my tribe's wrath." Elias gripped her arm harder as the rain poured over both of them, cold as steel. He shouted, his voice breaking with fury. "That is enough. You think I am afraid of losing? I have already lost once my wife, my daughter, my whole family, and nearly myself. If you walk away, I will lose again. Do you understand? I choose to stand by you, Awanada. I choose you and the boy." Awanada froze. The rain mixed with her tears, running down her sun-darkened face. For the first time, she saw Elias's steel-gray eyes trembling not from fear, but from real, unhidden pain. She let the pouch fall to the ground and stood still in his arms. In the rain-soaked yard, two souls once cast aside by the world, each scarred by loss, finally spoke the truth their hearts had long held in silence. The next morning, under the rising sun, the tribal council arrived, surrounding the cabin. Elder Gray Elk stood at the center of the gathering, his face stern as stone, and asked, "You white man, do you dare keep Awanada, defying our traditions?" Elias stepped forward without a rifle, walking straight into the ceremonial fire circle they had set. He raised his head, and his voice rang out, clear and steady. "I accept Awanada and the boy as my family. This is not pity. This is not possession. This is a choice." The crowd murmured. A few warriors gripped their spears, but Gray Elk raised a hand to stop them. He looked deep into Elias's eyes, then slowly nodded. "Words carry weight, but the full moon will reveal whether you are worthy to raise the boy in this land." The full moon rose high, silver and bright like the eye of a god watching over the barren land. In front of the small wooden cabin, the ceremonial fire crackled, surrounded by silent Apache faces, eyes filled with judgment and anticipation. Elias stood tall, his shirt soaked with sweat, but his back remained unbent. Beside him, Awanada stood like a bronze statue, her scarred shoulders bare, her large, calloused hand resting firmly on her son's shoulder. Elder Gray Elk stepped into the circle of firelight, his staff striking the earth with heavy, measured thuds. He did not deliver a verdict right away. Instead, he said, "No words are enough. Only actions can prove the truth." That night, they were not forced to part. The tribe withdrew, leaving behind a single challenge. And from that moment on, every day for Elias and Awanada became their answer to it. They rebuilt the broken fences, each wooden post driven deep into the dry ground with sweat and blood. Awanada hauled bundles of hay larger than her son, her shoulders raw but her eyes unwavering. Elias dug irrigation channels from a small stream nearly a mile away. The boy ran around them, carrying buckets of water with his tiny hands, laughing in the sun laughter that drowned out every whisper of doubt. One morning, a few warriors came quietly to observe. They saw Elias and Awanada pulling each other from the edge of a wildfire, saving both their cattle and the land itself. No more words were needed. The fire in their eyes delivered the message. Spring arrived. Fresh green grass blanketed the dry fields, and morning dew sparkled along the newly built fences. In the yard, the boy rode a young colt Elias had spent weeks taming, his laughter echoing across the hills. As the sun dipped low, Elias stood on the porch, his calloused hand resting on the rifle not to defend, but out of habit. Awanada stepped beside him, leaning into his shoulder. Her warmth, the strength of that woman beside him, made him feel he was no longer alone in the brutal West. In the distance, Gray Elk sat motionless on his horse, watching the scene for a long while. Then he turned the reins and said simply to the warriors, "They have chosen, and so have I." As the elder's silhouette faded down the trail, Elias gently squeezed Awanada's shoulder. Together, they looked toward the blood-red horizon, where peace had finally arrived, not granted, but built by their own hands. Dear friends, sometimes, love is not made of sweet promises. It is the courage to stand together when the whole world turns against you. A man who chooses his home over his own safety. A woman who chooses freedom over fear. It is that choice that turns two lonely souls into a family. And that is the only force strong enough to make the Wild West bow its head. Love and courage. Above all, I wish each of you peace and happiness, wherever you may be. I love you all, my dear audience of Wild West storytelling. Tell me, what did you feel while listening to this story? Leave a comment down below. Type the number 1 if this story touched your heart. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next thrilling tale from the Wild West. Elias Ward came to a stop when he saw a body collapsed at the edge of the trail. It was an Apache woman. Her frame was large, her muscles solid as stone, but her buckskin clothes were torn and soaked with dried blood across her shoulder and chest. Her breathing was shallow, her lips cracked from thirst. Elias gripped the stock of his rifle tightly. The Apache in this region often brought trouble, and he knew all too well that one wrong move, just bending down, could cost him his life. But then, she opened her eyes. Deep, black eyes, fierce and desperate all at once. Her blood-stained arm trembled slightly, reaching toward him. "Please, do not shoot. I will give you a family. I will bear you a son. Just save me." The words stopped Elias cold. In that instant, the image of a grave marker came rushing back where his wife and young boy lay buried. Losses, he thought, long buried, now torn open by the voice of a stranger. He looked at her, a cast-out warrior, now only blood and broken flesh, clinging to the faintest hope. Elias let go of the rifle stock and knelt beside her. He knew, without a doubt, that this choice would change everything. Elias struggled to lift the Apache woman's heavy body onto his horse. Blood from the wound on her shoulder soaked into his shirt, burning hot like fire. The horse snorted, uneasy, but Elias gripped the reins tight and urged it toward the cabin. The ride back felt endless. Dust whipped through the air as the wind howled, and the sun beat down relentlessly. Sweat and blood mingled. Elias could feel the faint, faltering rhythm of her heartbeat against his back, breaking now and then as if slipping away. One thought consumed him. If he was even a minute too late, she would die right there in the saddle. At last, the old cabin came into view. Elias dismounted and carried her inside, laying her gently onto the only straw bed left. He filled a wooden bowl with water and tried to part her dry, cracked lips. She coughed weakly as the water touched her tongue, but a flicker of life returned to her eyes. He peeled away the torn buckskin to reveal a deep gash on her left shoulder, with bruises spreading down her back and chest. Elias cleaned the wound with boiling water, the sharp scent of blood filling the hot, dry air. His hands trembled as he wrapped rough cloth around the injury, though he had bandaged himself many times before. Night fell. The desert wind howled through the cracks in the wooden walls, making the oil lamp flicker. The woman stirred, sweat glistening on her brow. Elias brought a spoon of thin porridge to her lips, and for the first time, he heard her name. "Takina," she whispered. Her voice faint as a ghost. Elias sat in silence. He had never heard that name before, but it echoed in the dark room like a quiet declaration. This was no nameless stranger. Takina opened her eyes, and in those black depths burned a flash of fury. She spoke in broken phrases. Her tribe had cast her out, tricked by a white man named Clive Remick into believing she was a traitor. She had resisted, denied it, but they had shoved her from the firelight, left her to die in the desert like she was already gone. Her voice broke. Elias said nothing. He poured more water and set it beside the bed, then turned toward the lamp. A heavy, unfamiliar weight settled in his chest. He knew, without question, that saving her had not only spared a life, it had also brought a blood feud into the four walls of his home. Outside, the desert winds howled, but inside the dim cabin, Elias quietly tied another knot in the bandage on Takina's shoulder. He exhaled slowly, whispering to himself, "All right. From now on, you have to live." The next morning, sunlight streamed through the cracks in the wooden wall, falling across Takina's pale face. Elias stepped out quietly, the cabin door creaking behind him. He was heading to the well for water, but something made him stop cold. Hoof prints, fresh ones, and they were not from his old mare. At least 2, maybe even 3 horses had stopped near the broken fence and turned back. Elias crouched down, his calloused fingers brushing the damp impressions in the dust. He knew right away someone had been watching. He picked up the Winchester by the door and gave it a quick wipe. Memories from his younger days came flooding back, his time riding with the local militia. It had been years since he had carried a rifle all day. But now, this house was no longer just a home. It was a fortress. Inside the cabin, Takina was trying to sit up, sweat beading on her forehead. Elias stepped in just as she staggered forward, reaching for his short knife on the table. "What are you doing?" he asked, voice low and coarse. Takina looked up, her dark eyes blazing. "If they come back, I will not lie here waiting to die. Teach me how to shoot." Elias frowned. In the daylight, her body was clearer, her shoulders still wrapped in bandages, her chest bruised, but her arms and wide shoulders held the strength of a seasoned warrior. Without a word, he gave a faint nod. That afternoon he rebuilt the fence around the cattle pen, reinforced the door locks. Then, Elias brought out an old revolver and placed it in Takina's hands. Her grip was firm, natural. He showed her how to open the chamber, how to load the rounds, how to breathe steady before pulling the trigger. Each time Takina raised the gun, sweat ran down her sun-darkened arms, and her eyes burned like black stone set aflame. The first shot hit the wooden post in the yard. Takina did not flinch. She just tightened her grip. Elias gave a small nod. No praise, no scolding, just recognition. That night, as they sat by the fire, Elias glanced toward the window. In the far darkness, he thought he saw something move fast, then gone. He said nothing, just pushed another log into the flames. But in his mind, one truth rang clear. Time was running out. And if Clive Remick truly was behind all this, then the storm was coming, and it was coming straight for this little cabin. The Arizona sun sank low over the horizon, painting the dry prairie in shades of burning bronze. Elias tied off the reins and let out a long breath after a full day hauling wood to shore up the fence. Sweat streaked down his cheek, carving paths through the red dust. He turned and saw Takina struggling under the weight of a large log, her shoulders still bandaged, but her muscles defined beneath sun-darkened skin. "You should rest," Elias said, his voice gravelly. Takina set the log down, breathing hard, but her eyes were steady. "If I don't do it, you'll collapse before I do." The reply caught Elias off guard. How long had it been since he had heard a voice that was both challenging and caring at the same time? He looked into her dark eyes and saw not just pain but a flicker of something softer. By the time the cattle were back in the pen, the sky had turned deep blue. They sat beside the fire in the cabin, quietly eating a bland pot of beans. Outside, the wind howled past the windows, but inside, the firelight danced across Takina's face, her eyes glimmering like still water at dusk. Elias accidentally brushed a spoon against a scratch on his hand and winced. Immediately, Takina reached for him. Her hand, large, warm, and rough, closed gently around his calloused fingers. "You've lost a lot too, haven't you?" she asked softly. Elias didn't answer right away. In his mind, he saw the little graves where his wife and son now rested. He gave a quiet nod. Takina looked down, her voice trembling. "So have I. Being cast out by your own people hurts more than any wound." Silence followed. The wind outside, the crackle of the fire, the rhythm of two hearts, everything seemed to slow. Then, without a word, Elias leaned in and pressed his lips to hers. It was not a kiss of gentleness. It was the kiss of two souls who had lost everything, colliding with the desperate need to feel alive. It was clumsy, heavy, and burning. Takina closed her eyes, surrendering to the moment as if, for the first time, she was allowed to trust someone's arms. Elias pulled her close, and for the first time in years, his embrace did not feel empty. By the time they parted, the fire had faded to glowing embers. Elias looked at her and sighed. "From now on, you are not alone." Takina gave a small nod, her lips curling into a tired but radiant smile. Outside, the desert night still covered the land in darkness, but inside the little cabin, a new fire had been kindled not from dry wood, but from two hearts that had once been buried in ashes. Thank you for being here. If this story brought back memories of dusty sunsets and hoofbeats echoing through your soul, subscribe to my channel, so every day we can sit down again. And I'll tell you another tale from the Wild West. 2 days later, the air was thick with heat. Not a single breeze stirred. Elias was tying off the latch on the barn gate when the old dog barked sharply, teeth bared toward the trail. Instinctively, Elias reached for the Winchester leaning against the fence. In the distance, a ribbon of red dust rose into the sky. 4 riders appeared. The lead man, a heavy-set figure with a wild beard and squinting eyes beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Elias recognized him instantly, Clive Remick, a notorious arms dealer in these parts, and the man who had falsely accused Takina. As the horses came to a stop, Remick sneered, his voice high and mocking. "Ward, heard you're hiding something that ain't yours. Hand over the Apache woman, and maybe you live to see another sunrise." Elias stood tall, the rifle resting at his waist. "She's under my roof. No one lays a hand on her." Inside the cabin, Takina heard every word. She pushed herself upright, grabbing the revolver Elias had given her days ago. Her steps were unsteady, her wounds still fresh, but her eyes burned sharp as obsidian. Remick flicked his hand. 2 of his men dismounted, pistols drawn. A chilling silence followed. Then the first shot cracked the bullet, slamming into the wooden post on the porch. Elias did not hesitate. He fired. The Winchester roared, and one man's gun went flying from his hand. Gunfire erupted across the prairie. Takina stood at the window, returning fire. Her first shot missed, but the second struck a rider in the shoulder, sending him crashing from his horse. Remick cursed loudly, yanking his reins and ducking behind a large boulder. The shootout lasted only minutes, but the dust and thunder made it feel like an hour. Finally, Remick screamed, "We'll be back, Ward. Next time, you and that woman both die." He kicked his horse, pulling his wounded men away, leaving one groaning in the dirt. Elias did not chase them. He stood firm, rifle raised, watching. Inside the cabin, Takina leaned against the wall, chest heaving, but her eyes glowed with fire. She looked at Elias, and a faint smile crossed her lips, tired, yet proud. Elias stepped inside, meeting her gaze. "We just started a war." Takina nodded hard, her voice rough but unwavering. "Then we'll end it together." Outside, the sun sank low, bleeding red across the sky, signaling that the real storm had only just begun. That night, the cabin sat silent beneath the desert wind. Elias was at the table, slowly wiping down his Winchester, each motion heavy with thought. The scent of gunpowder still lingered, mixing with the smoky glow of the oil lamp. He glanced toward the bed, where Takina sat quietly, shoulder wrapped in fresh bandages, eyes fixed on the fire. She said nothing for a long while. Then, slowly, her hand came to rest on her stomach. Elias froze. His gray eyes locked onto her. Takina bit her lip, her voice rough, nearly breaking. I'm pregnant." Elias dropped the cloth, his heart pounding. In that moment, the past came rushing back, his son's laughter echoing in his arms. Then the dry, lonely grave where that laughter now lay. Old wounds bled into the present, tightening his chest. Takina looked at him, her gaze fierce yet full of fear. "If you think I'm just bringing trouble, I will leave. I won't be your burden." Elias rose, stepped forward, and placed his calloused hand over hers, gripping it firmly. His voice was low but steady. "If you leave, I lose everything all over again. I swore I'd never abandon family again. You stay, and this child will be mine." Tears welled in Takina's dark eyes, but she did not let them fall. Instead, she nodded strong and silent, her muscled arms trembling with emotion. In the days that followed, everything changed. Elias poured his strength into the land, fortifying the cabin, digging a new water pit, building a storage shed. Takina, still aching but unyielding, carried water, swung hammers, and worked like a second ranch hand. One evening, with the sun blazing red behind the mountains, Elias was splitting wood when a rope snapped back and sliced his hand open. Blood spilled fast. Takina rushed to him, grabbing his hand with both of hers. In that moment, their eyes met, and no words were needed. That night, by the fire, Elias spoke quietly. "From now on, you're not just someone I saved. You're my home." Takina leaned against his shoulder and whispered, "And you're where I belong." Outside, the prairie wind still howled across the land. But within the walls of that little cabin, a silent vow had taken root, a promise that they would fight, not just to survive, but for the family they were becoming. At the break of dawn, the thunder of hooves echoed across the dry prairie. Elias stood on the cabin porch, Winchester fully loaded, eyes narrowed against the rising dust. He counted no fewer than 7 riders, red dirt swirling behind them. At the front rode Clive Remick, his cruel face twisted into a wicked grin. "Ward!" Remick shouted, his voice slicing through the wind. "This time, there's no escape. Hand over the Apache woman, and you get to keep your life. Otherwise, both of you die here." Elias gripped the rifle tighter but said nothing. Behind him, Takina stepped out, buckskin clothes hastily wrapped around her, a white bandage on her shoulder, and her black eyes burning like fire. She placed one hand over her belly and raised the revolver in the other. "We do not back down," she said, her voice sharp as steel. Elias nodded. The two took their positions, he at the porch, she at the window. They had been preparing for days. Traps laid around the fence, water barrels ready for fire, ammunition evenly split. Remick gave the signal. 3 riders charged forward. Elias fired first, his bullet slammed into one rider's chest, throwing him from the saddle. Gunfire cracked through the air, sending birds flying in every direction. Takina returned fire. Her shot struck the second man in the shoulder, drawing a scream. But a bullet whistled past, grazing Elias's arm. Blood spurted. He stumbled, but propped the Winchester on the fence, squeezed off another round, and brought down the third attacker. Remick howled in rage, wild like a cornered animal. He leapt from his horse and ducked behind the rocky outcrop near the cabin, firing rapidly. Bullets tore through the doorframe, splinters flying. Takina lunged forward, pushing Elias out of the line of fire. She braced her revolver on the window frame and fired. 1 shot. 2 shots. Smoke filled the air. Remick screamed, his gun arm snapped back, blood blooming across his chest. Staggering, he turned and mounted his horse, galloping away with the 2 surviving men. The front yard smoldered, thick with gunpowder. Elias slumped onto the porch step, blood pouring from his arm. Takina dropped beside him, her strong hands pressing into the wound, her eyes fierce with worry and pride. "You're not leaving me. Or our son," she whispered. Elias looked into her eyes, steel melting for the first time. He took her hand, whispering back, "We won, and from now on, no one will come between us." Beyond them, the fiery morning sun lit up the smoke-streaked cabin. They had stood their ground not just against Remick, but against a fate that had tried to take everything from them. After the fierce shootout, the cabin lay quiet, the scent of gunpowder still lingering in the air. Elias sat on the wooden bed, his arm wrapped tight in bandages, his breathing still heavy. Takina sat beside him, her sun-darkened hands working gently to replace the bandage, her gaze both firm and tender. "You were reckless," she whispered, her voice raspy but warm. Elias gave a weary smile, his gray eyes locking with hers. "If we didn't stand our ground today, there would be no tomorrow." In the days that followed, life slowly returned to rhythm. Together, Elias and Takina rebuilt the broken fences. They worked like true warriors, sweat pouring, muscles straining but with a quiet harmony that only a bonded pair could share. And then, spring came to Arizona. Green shoots began to sprout, covering the black scars left by the firefight. In the garden, Takina sowed seeds, her warrior's hands now planting life instead of wielding weapons. Elias built a small wooden cradle, his once weary eyes glowing with a hope long forgotten. On the day the baby was born, the entire cabin filled with the clear, bright cry of new life. A baby boy, strong and healthy, his tiny fingers gripping Elias's calloused thumb. Elias held him close, gray eyes misting, and whispered, "From this day forward, we are no longer alone." Takina leaned on his shoulder, sweat still on her brow, but her face radiant. In that moment, they were no longer outcasts. They were a family. Weeks later, Elias hammered a wooden sign at the front gate. "Whole Family Ranch." A new ranch not just of land and livestock, but of choice and love, rising above the weight of prejudice and pain. That evening, as a crimson sunset swept across the prairie, Elias stood on the cabin porch, one arm holding his son, the other wrapped around Takina's hand. Together, they looked toward the horizon, where the sun dipped in fire. No more fear, no more ghosts of the past, only the peace of a home they had fought for with blood, with faith, and with love. "This," Elias said quietly, "this is what a home truly island." Takina tilted her head, her lips curling into a tired but proud smile. "And here, we are a family." In the golden light of dusk, the image was burned into time, a rancher who had once lost everything, and a warrior woman once cast aside, now standing side by side, beginning a new chapter of life together. My friends, we do not choose where we're born, but we can choose how we live and who we stand beside. When a man dares to protect, when a woman stands unbroken, and a child is born of them both, that is proof that justice still exists beneath the sky. For love and kindness will always be stronger than any storm, and it is those things that turn even the harshest land into a home. It has been an honor riding with you. From the bottom of my heart, I wish you joy and peace. I love each and every one of you, my dear listeners of Wild West Storytelling. Let me know what you thought of this story. Leave a comment down below. Type Ina if you enjoyed it. And don't forget to subscribe for more gripping tales from the Wild West. On the brittle branch of a dry oak tree, a rope was pulled tight around the neck of a young woman, stretching her body upward. Her legs kicked in desperation, her eyes were wide open, and her breath caught in her chest. Eliza Blaine, the only daughter of a long-standing pioneer family, was staring death in the face. Right in front of her stood Amos Kane, a tall man with a vicious scar running down his cheek, wearing a wicked smile. In his hand, he held a land deed and a gleaming knife. "Just sign this, and you live," Amos growled, the cold blade brushing against her skin. "Refuse, and let the sun and dust swallow you until nothing's left." Eliza hissed through clenched teeth, her voice hoarse from the tightening rope. "I'd rather die than let you take my father's land." Amos burst out laughing and left her swinging in the blistering heat. He believed no one could resist the thirst and scorching sun of the canyon, but he did not know far off on a distant hillside, another pair of eyes was watching. Caleb Holt, a rancher who lived alone with his cattle and the weight of grief, was driving his herd home. He stood frozen, his calloused hand gripping the hilt of his knife. Those steel-gray eyes never left Eliza's writhing figure, and in his mind, a raspy voice echoed, "No one deserves to die like this. Not while I'm still breathing." Red dust swirled up from the hillside, and the sun beat down in a blinding glare. A lone figure halted his horse on the slope, silent as if carved into the sky. It was Caleb Holt, a rancher who lived alone on the edge of the prairie. He said nothing, made no sound, only clenched his jaw, his steel-gray eyes locked onto the canyon below where Eliza struggled against the noose of death. The wind carried up the rasping laughter of Amos Kane. He stood beneath the dead oak tree, gripping his knife, his eyes burning with the thrill of power. "Sign your name, or let the sun burn you down to nothing," he shouted. Caleb did not move. Men out west often chose to look away, because anyone who crossed Amos usually ended up dead. But Caleb's gaze never left Eliza, her flailing legs, her purpled face, still managing to throw a defiant glare at the man who wanted her broken. The rancher's calloused hand slid down to the hilt of the knife at his hip. He knew the gun was strapped to the saddle, but he did not reach for it. A gunshot would bring trouble. A knife now that was a quiet answer. He pulled his hat low over his eyes and drew in a breath full of hot dust. Then, as Amos turned his back, sure that thirst and death would wear Eliza down, Caleb stepped down from the saddle. His boots sank into the cracked earth, each step carrying him silently down the slope. No grand entrance, no vow spoken, just a rancher walking straight into danger to pull one soul back from the rope. Caleb moved down the slope, one careful step at a time, loose rocks crunching beneath his boots. Red dust rose in thick clouds, cloaking his silhouette against the burning sky. Beneath the oak, Eliza's head had slumped forward, her breath ragged, as if being torn from her chest. The rope burned against her skin, leaving dark bruises around her neck. Pressing his back to a rock face, Caleb scanned the area. Not a soul in sight, only black crows circling overhead, their wings beating the heavy air. He tilted his head, drew his knife, and the old blade gleamed under the harsh Sunday. In the space of a heartbeat, he lunged forward. Eliza's eyes flew open at the sharp sound of the rope snapping. Her body dropped, dizzy and limp, but instead of hitting the ground, she collapsed safely into the strong arms of the man who had just appeared. Caleb held her tightly and pulled her out from beneath the tree's shadow. His breath was hot, thick with dust and heat. Eliza gasped, voice barely audible. "Please, do not leave me. Save me, and I will give you everything I have." The broken promise landed like another knife in Caleb's chest. He did not answer. He only bowed his head and pressed a calloused finger gently to her lips, signaling her to stay silent. A soft crunch of gravel echoed from afar. Caleb looked up. Amos Kane had returned. He staggered through the red haze, his hand clenched around a revolver, eyes flashing with suspicion. "You fool, how dare you?" Amos snarled, raising the gun. "I will string you up right beside her." Caleb laid Eliza down behind the rock, tucking her out of sight, then slowly rose to his full height, his body cutting a dark line through the glaring Sunday. The knife was still in his hand, its blade catching the light. No explanations. No wasted motion, just two men facing each other in a canyon full of red dust, with death thick in the air between them. Amos squinted, the black barrel of his gun glinting under the sunlight. His hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from fury at the sight of the severed noose and his prey falling into another man's arms. "Stay right there, rancher," he growled, his voice rough and cracked. "You have no idea you just bought yourself a death sentence." Caleb said nothing. He lowered his shoulders, the dagger glinting in his calloused grip. His steel-gray eyes were locked on the muzzle of that gun, each breath sinking with the wind howling through the canyon walls. The gunshot cracked like thunder. The bullet tore into the dirt inches from Caleb's boot. Red soil exploded upward, the acrid stench of gunpowder hanging in the air. Caleb charged. Dust flew with each step as he closed the gap, his body compact and fast. Amos roared, firing again and again. Bullets split the air, but Caleb twisted, diving past a rock, then sprang up like a ghost. The knife slashed, a flash of steel knocking the revolver from Amos's hand. The Colt spun through the air, then hit the dirt with a sharp clatter. The two men slammed into each other. Fist pounded, bones cracked. Amos drove his head forward. Caleb answered with a crushing elbow. Blood poured from the old scar on Amos's cheek, making him even more savage. They grappled in the red dust, every blow echoing through the canyon. Eliza, still huddled behind the rock, eyes wide, heart racing. She held her throat with trembling fingers, too stunned to scream. With a final burst of strength, Caleb slammed Amos to the ground. The man howled, thrashing wildly. But the rancher was faster. He grabbed the very rope he had cut moments ago and bound Amos's hands behind his back. Amos struggled, his face smeared with dirt, eyes blazing with rage. "She belongs to me. That land is mine." Caleb's voice was low, each word etched in stone. She belongs to no one. And neither does the land. Eliza gasped, a tear rolling down her cheek. But in her eyes now there was light. Thank you for being here. If this story brought back memories of the old days, dusty afternoons, and the sound of hooves echoing in your chest, go ahead and subscribe to my channel. So each day, we can sit together once again. And I will tell you another tale from the west. The canyon fell into silence after the struggle. Only the wind stirred the dust, and the labored breaths of two survivors lingered in the heat. Caleb held the rope tight, pinning Amos face down in the dirt like a beast brought down. Then he turned away, leaving the man groaning behind him. Eliza was still crouched behind the rock, her body trembling. Her eyes were bloodshot, her breath shallow and quick, but her gaze had not lost its pride. When Caleb approached, she looked up, her lips quivering. He knelt beside her, one strong arm sliding gently under her shoulders. The warmth of his calloused hand spread through her bruised skin. Eliza gave a faint shake of her head, her voice hoarse. You should not have risked your life for me. Caleb did not answer right away. Instead, he took his knife and cut the rope binding her wrists. The red welts were deep, dotted with blood. From his pocket, he pulled out an old scrap of cloth and wrapped it around her wrist, awkward but firm. Men like him, Caleb finally spoke, his voice low and rough. All they need is one chance, and they come back to take everything. Eliza bit her lip, her eyes glassy with tears. From inside her shirt, she pulled out the bundle of papers Amos had tried to steal. The pages were creased and torn at the edges, but the original seal remained. She clutched them to her chest like the last piece of her family's legacy. My father bled to keep this land, she whispered. If I have to die, I will not lose it. Caleb looked at her, and for the first time, a trace of softness flickered in his steel-gray eyes. He gave a small nod, not a promise, but a quiet recognition. Far off, the sun had shifted into a deep copper hue, casting the entire canyon in fiery light. The evening wind blew through, carrying the rasp of distant crows. Caleb helped Eliza to her feet. Her steps faltered at first, but they grew steadier with his hand holding firm. Behind them, Amos lay bound and howling, but Caleb did not look back. He spoke just loud enough for Eliza to hear. We are taking him to town. Let the law deal with him. Eliza raised her head, eyes fixed on the red-streaked horizon. Tears slid down her bruised cheeks, but her lips curled into a faint smile, a smile born from the return of hope. The dusty red road leading back to town stretched long and silent. Caleb walked ahead, leading the horse with one hand and gripping the rope tied to Amos with the other. Eliza followed behind, clutching the stack of land papers tightly to her chest. Her steps were heavy, but the fear in her eyes was gone. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ground. Insects buzzed in the dry grass, and the wind whistled through the canyons like a warning. From time to time, Caleb glanced at Amos, his gaze cold as steel. But the villain was not done yet. As Caleb paused to help Eliza over a steep patch, Amos subtly bent forward, fingers slipping toward the heel of his boot. A small hidden blade caught the sunlight. In a split second, the rope was severed. Amos lunged, eyes wild, charging straight at Caleb. The impact echoed loud. The knife flashed past Caleb's face. He dodged, then countered with a punch that hit like a hammer. But Amos was relentless. He rolled aside, slashing the knife across the rancher's shoulder. Blood soaked through the dusty shirt. Eliza screamed and stumbled back. She looked around. There were only piles of old timber stacked outside an abandoned yard on the town's edge. Shadows stretched long now, covering danger like a veil. The scuffle turned into a full-on brawl. Caleb and Amos fought among the woodpiles, their clash ringing out through the empty lot. Blades sliced through the air. Fists collided. Boots kicked up dust. Sweat, blood, and grit mixed into a raw haze. In the chaos, Eliza spotted the knife Amos had dropped. Her hand trembled as she picked it up, pulse pounding. One strike, that was all it would take to end it all. Caleb turned to her, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met. He did not plead. His look said one quiet thing. Do not let him turn you into what he island. Eliza froze. The knife felt like lead in her hand. Tears welled up, but instead of driving the blade down, she flung it away. It spun through the air and stuck into a log with a heavy thunk. No, she shouted, her voice shaking but clear. I will not become like you. That moment, Caleb gathered every ounce of strength left in him and delivered a brutal throw. Amos hit the ground hard, gasping beneath the gathering shadows of the timber yard. From a distance, the sound of footsteps approached, and lantern light flickered into view. Townsfolk and the sheriff had come running at the sound of the fight. The lantern light swept across the lumber yard, casting its glow over Amos Kane's bloodied face. He tried to rise, but Caleb stood in his path, steel-gray eyes locked, chest rising and falling with heavy breaths. "Hold him right there," a deep voice barked. The sheriff and 2 deputies rushed in, guns drawn. Townsfolk followed behind, murmuring, eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. Amos shrieked, his voice cracked and raw. "You think you can take that land from me? That girl, that land, they are mine. All of it is mine." The sheriff kicked the revolver away and dropped to one knee, wrenching Amos's arms behind his back and locking them in iron shackles. "You will scream behind bars, Kane. This land has no place for men like you anymore." Eliza stepped out from the shadows, still clutching the crumpled land papers. The night wind tousled her hair, and the red marks from the rope were still etched across her face. Every eye turned toward her. Some whispered doubts, but most fell silent. No one could deny the truth standing before them. A girl who had survived Amos Kane's blade. Caleb stepped up beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. His grip was rough, steady, and said everything without words. Eliza looked up, eyes brimming, a trembling smile on her lips. "You gave me more than my life," she whispered, voice hoarse but every word clear. "You gave me back my home." Caleb looked at her, and for a moment his hard gaze softened. He spoke slowly, his voice low and steady, like stone against a whetstone. "Hold on to it, like your father did, and never let anyone else decide for you again." The deputies dragged Amos away, still kicking and spitting curses that echoed across the timber yard. But no one listened anymore. One by one, lanterns dimmed with the footsteps, until all that remained was quiet night. Caleb and Eliza stood side by side, their shadows stretching long across the darkened ground. Above them, the star-filled sky spread wide, silently witnessing 2 souls who had crossed the edge of life and death. Eliza held the papers tight, as if clutching both her past and her future. Caleb glanced down the road leading into town, then back at the steady light in her eyes. And in the silence, something unspoken passed between them. Life would never be the same again. Night had fallen over the border town. Flickering oil lamps cast long shadows against the weathered wooden walls, and the occasional sound of horse hooves echoed briefly before fading into silence. The air seemed to have settled after all the chaos. But for those who had witnessed it, the fire had not truly gone out. Caleb and Eliza walked slowly down the main street. From doorways on either side, townsfolk peeked out, their eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and quiet respect. No one said a word, but the silence was different now. There was no more judgment, only a silent acknowledgement. Eliza held the land deed tightly against her chest, her hand still trembling slightly. Her neck bore the bruises, but her eyes shone beneath the starlit sky. She looked up and whispered, just loud enough for Caleb to hear, "I thought I had lost everything, but now, I know my father is still here, in every inch of this land." Caleb stopped and turned to her. In his usually hard steel-gray eyes, a flicker of warmth appeared. He gave a small nod, his voice low like the night wind. "This land holds on to those who honor it. Just like people, we only truly belong to each other when we are willing to stand together in the face of danger." They paused in front of the quiet saloon porch. In the distance, the sound of iron chains echoed Amos being dragged to the jailhouse. But beyond the edges of town, where the lanterns could not reach, a shadow on horseback slipped away unnoticed. One of Amos's loyal men, his eyes burning with hate, disappeared into the night. Eliza did not see him, but Caleb did. And he understood this fight was not truly over. Amos might scream from behind bars, but hatred and ambition still lingered out there in the dark. The 2 walked on. Above them, the sky glittered with stars, casting a fragile light of hope over the cracked earth. Caleb and Eliza moved side by side in silence, their shadows stretching long over the broken ground. Through this story, I only meant to recall a piece of a past filled with red dust and fire, a time when the strong believed they could write the law themselves. But today, things are different. We live in a world of law, of justice, where every person has the right to be protected. What you have just heard is only the echo of a time long gone. And because of that, we must cherish the present even more. Live with integrity. Respect the law. Above all, I wish all of you health and happiness. I love every one of you, my incredible audience here at Wild West Storytelling. Let me know how this story made you feel. Leave a comment down below. Type the number 1 if you enjoyed this tale. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more thrilling stories from the Wild West.